Hello, ladies and gents. Happy Wednesday. I'm looking in front of me and trying to look to my left against my phone as well. I'm on Facebook, I'm on YouTube. I'm trying to influence the youth today. Young teenagers, mature teenagers, young adults, mature adults want to change give themselves something to do, especially older people that are tired. They want to still want to get education, keep their mind occupied. Keeping your mind occupied is very important. So if you want to get into academics, maybe in your 60s, 70s, some even do in their 80s. When we read, we should reference our reading, understanding politics, ideas, and institutions in the modern world. It's module DD211. The book is edited by Geoff Andrews, Agnes Sasaki, Andy O'Kane, Raya Pokohonovic, and Dan Taylor. The book's from the Open University, Walton Hall, Milton Keynes, MK76AA. First published 2015, second edition 2022. Page 60, Who Does Politics? Chapter 2. Scholars and journalists have documented the centralization of power in Russia and the alliance of formed between the states. The oligarch rulers, certainly a vestige of the Soviet Union, politics, and the Russian Orthodox Church. So the choice of the cathedral as a stage for performing a guerrilla concert. I bet a short one was audacious and proactive. It not only highlighted this alliance, but also offended in order to draw attention to an injustice. Following the performance of Punk Prayer, 3 members of that band were arrested, held without bail and subject to a very public and, many argued, show trial. They were convicted of hooliganism, motivated by religious hatred, and sentenced to 3 years imprisonment. One was subsequently released on appeal, with the other 2 members given amnesty and released shortly before they were due to have completed their sentences. The group, which had a fluid and changing membership, continued their performative politics at the 2014 Winter Olympics in Sochi. Russia, where they had planned to perform a song called Putin Will Teach You to Love the Motherland. They were detained several times by police and beaten by a government-sponsored militia group, Walker 2014. Members of the group also disrupted the 2018 FIFA World Cup final in Moscow. The group said that, among other things, the present in which they invaded the pitch dressed as police aimed to draw attention to the plight of political prisoners and demanded their release. BBC News 2018. Members of the group who participated in a performative act were arrested again and have subsequently been in and out of prison. In 2021, days after having completed their sentence of charges of minor hooliganism and disobeying police, some members of the group were detained again, and some charges to RFE, RL's Russian service, 2021, page 61. There are many ways of interpreting and understanding the influence of Pussy Riot's Act, but from the point of view of this chapter, we need to highlight how the members of a punk band perform politics by articulating their rights to politics as a question of power. What happened when members of the group were released after their original sentence in 2012 is also interesting. Upon their release from prison, 2 members of Pussy Riot said that they were now interested not only in the rise of authoritarianism in Russia, but also in the rights of prisoners. From their experience in prison, they triggered a riposte from the other members of a collective who disagreed with associating with specific causes. They thought that this is harmful to the collective to confuse a campaign for prisoners' rights, who, with our female separatist art performances. For some in Pussy Riot, the imprisoned members become so carried away with the problems in Russia prisons that they were completely forgot about the inspiration ideas of the group. Feminism, separatists, which caused their unjust punishment, criticising them for abandoning radical autonomism. Some of the remaining members found their advocacy incompatible with the kind of politics the collective performed, which they considered a radical political statements and proactive works of art. I need a pen. I need a pen. Enough pen now. Enough pen. This is quite a good bit for who does politics. All this could be dismissed either as envy or as part of the Pussy Riot members who missed out on the fame even prison members acquired, or perhaps as internal strife percepted by prolonged and intense public scrutiny and police attention. But the point made by Remain Anonymous Pussy Riot members is quite important and pertains to a key point of this chapter on who does politics. 62. There are two issues that this response raises. Performing politics can itself be politics, and it needs to be associated with an already identified cause, such as the rights of prisoners. Sometimes performing politics as staging acts is meant to publicise an injustice and draw attention to a point of its perpetration. This may take legal staging, but does not mean that it is by definition a political. As we have seen earlier in our discussion of Anonymous, the actors of politics may sometimes want to remain anonymous. Again, the question here is not to determine whether the anonymous members of the Pussy Riot or it is named formerly imprisoned members are better or worse at performing politics. Both raise questions about contemporary politics and its performance, and who can enter into politics as legitimate actors, and about the relation between politics and legality. Page 63. In this chapter, we have discussed how the actors of politics, who does politics, come into being through various acts, stating such acts involve social, legal, and cultural struggles. We've seen that who does politics is an essential aspect of the contestation over the meaning of politics in general, but also of democratic politics specifically. It is important to keep a historical perspective on how the social actors of politics arise and become political agents through this contestation. We've also seen that there are lineages between historical actors and the contemporary social struggles are always present in the democratic imagination. How the suffragettes fought for the right for women to vote plays an important symbolic role for other struggles, such as the struggles of prisoners for their right to vote. The way in which the working class fought for the right to vote inspired the struggles of black and minority ethnic people for the right to vote. The expansion of social groups claiming the right to perform politics is part of the progressive enfranchisement that began in the late 19th century and continues today. To address the question, who does politics, the chapter devolved the idea of performing politics. This, we argued, involves questioning what is accepted as a given state of affairs, influencing or wanting to influence the course of events so that the state of affairs is changed or maintained. We named these two conditions of performing politics question and power. We then suggested that if acting politically involves question of power, then it involves those who claim the right to question a given state of affairs and claim the right to influence the state of affairs. The key idea of this chapter, that performing politics or acting politically, means entering into contestation about who should make such claims, who can make them and who actually does, and led us to three issues: who should perform politics, who can perform politics, and who does perform politics. We've seen that these three issues are interrelated and cannot be considered separately. For instance, the normative issue of who should perform politics clearly influences the illegal issue of who can perform politics. Similarly, the issue of actually does politics influence both the issue of who should and who can perform politics. The phrase performing politics implies that there are actors who enter into politics and establish or constitute themselves as legitimate, if not legal, doers of politics. When we say that we perform politics, it implies that we bring something into being, in this case, really, ourselves as actors of politics. For working class men, women, black people, gay men, lesbians, and many other activists to come into being as actors of politics, they had to perform politics. For them, there was no other way of performing politics but staging themselves through political acts to claim the right to question a given state of affairs and claim a right to influence the state of affairs. We have also seen that although performing politics involves acting as individuals, it also means acting as social actors. This complicates performing politics in that each of us belong to different and multiple social groups, and our acts may bring about conflicting outcomes. When we are performing politics, relating to one of our own interests, we may be curtailing another of our own interests, or even preventing others from performing politics. This complexity of performing politics has been part of politics since its beginning. The question, who does politics, reflects this complexity. Where is politics done? Having already analysed what politics is and is inquired into who it is done by, or more accurately, who can, who should, and who actually does politics, it is now time to ask where politics is done. You might already have sense that the answer to the question depends on how you answer the previous two. If you begin with relatively narrowing the definition of politics at that which concerns the state, for instance, then you might say politics is done by politicians or by citizens at the moment at which they choose their governments. Consequently, you might answer the question of where politics is done by pointing to spaces such as Chamber of Disputes of Chile, United Nations headquarters, or in New York City with Senate Sirimu, Welsh Parliament in Cardiff, or the Parliament of Rwanda. If you select the definition of politics that lies towards the broader side of the spectrum, politics then exercise of power, for instance, or choose to argue that political activity has no essential characteristics and any action has potential to be political in the right context. If interpreted as such, then your answers to both these questions of who does politics and where politics is done will be very different. If anything, has the potential to be political. And anyone who has the potential to act politically, then it would seem that politics can be done anywhere, on a stage, in an art gallery, on the street, at the kitchen table, or in the virtual space created by the internet. It is as simple as that. In some ways, it is simple as that. As you'll see in the next section, politics is done in different kinds of spaces. But the question of where politics is done also brings to the fore another issue, that of the politics of space. Thus, in addition to introducing you to different kinds of space in which politics can be done, the chapter also introduces you to the idea that space itself can be an object of political struggle. The chapter, therefore, will introduce you to some spaces of politics, kinds of places in which politics can be done, and to the politics of space. The idea that space themselves have political significance, and thus that contests over space are deeply political contexts. Section 2 of this chapter attends to three kinds of space in which politics is done. Legislative spaces are spaces in which laws are made, judicial spaces or spaces in which legal disputes are adjudicated, such as courts, and private spaces such as the home. These three kinds of spaces are introduced through the specific examples of the Senedd Sirimu, Welsh Parliament, the US Supreme Court, the ancient Athenian Agora, and the Ottoman, the Sultan's Court and Harem household. The considerable historical and geographical span of these examples is not accidental. It enables to draw attention not only to some very different and perhaps unexpected places in which politics is done, but also to the fact the three kinds of spaces mentioned above: legislative, judicial, and private, have existed and continue to exist in different forms in different historical and geographical contexts. While section 2 of this chapter is dedicated to examine different spaces of politics, section 3 attends to the politics of space. Although the phrases spaces of politics and politics of space might strike you as similar, the difference between them is quite significant. The first can refer to both the particular space in which politics is done and the abstract relationship between politics and space. That is, the notion that politics must happen somewhere. The phrase of politics, space, connotes something different, namely the idea that space itself is political. Now, politics is often done not against the backdrop of the space, but through and with the use of that space. And that consequently contests over space and its distribution. Allocation and use are deeply political context. Section 3 of the chapter will examine some aspects of the politics of space by attending to Occupy movement, which was categorised by both the struggles it waged over particular spaces and the manner in which it utilises space to make particular political statements. Spaces of politics. Before we discuss precisely what it is at stake when we speak of spaces of politics, it might be useful to pause and briefly examine the distinction between the concepts of space and place. Thus far, we have been using the concepts fairly interchangeably, but they are often taken to very different things, like the concept of politics. Space and place or contested politics debates over definitions of space and place and over the distinction between them have been long-standing, multiple and often contradictory. Uses of concepts are in circulation in the disciplines of geography, sociology, politics, and the social sciences more broadly. It is impossible to consider, let alone critically engage with these definitions here. Even if we developed the whole book to them, we would be just scratching the surface. Thus, to make things easier and to allow us to move forward with our main interest of this chapter, we will use the terms in the following way. Space in the singular. It is used to denote the concept of space. As you will recall chapter 1, a concept is a general idea of something, such as the concept of politics or the concept of cat. So just like politics or cat, space will be used to refer not to a particular site or location, but a general idea that we ourselves and all that we do, including politics, exist in space. Spaces in the plural. It used to denote particular sites or locations where or through which politics is done. Thus, in this chapter, the relationship between particular space and place is analogues to the relationship between particular cats and the concept of cat, or particularly presidents and the concept of presidency. Place and spaces are used interchangeably with space to denote particular sites or locations where, in what kinds of space is politics done. Before we answer the question, it might be useful to revisit the definition of politics articulated in chapter 1. There was variously defined politics as that which concerns the state, a non-violent method of conflict resolution, conflict, the exercise of power, a social activity. Page 76. Take care. One love. Speak soon.